It's a nightmare.
Okay, 6 o'clock. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Town of West Newbury Finance Committee. First order of business is public comment. Public comment is limited to residents of West Newbury and items on the agenda. Residents are allowed 2 minutes to share their comments or thoughts. We may allow for more time depending on participation. Is there any public comment? Being none, we'll move on to the next item in our agenda, the approval of minutes.
I did not do the minutes this month, my bad.
Okay,
We got
right at it. Item number 1, unless you want to change the order, Angus. I mean, what do you?
No, we're expecting the school reps at about 7. So
Council on Aging, then let's go.
okay, so I'm just going to go work from the packet that was sent out over the weekend. The main change in the COA budget, 2 things. First of all, I want to introduce Christine Marshall as our new council aging director.
Nice to meet you.
Christine was hired last summer as the assistant town clerk. One of her prior jobs had been with the Andover Senior Center, and when Teresa left in December to take the job at Hamilton, Christine had actually already been helping out in that office and then applied internally. She was appointed earlier this year, so we're delighted. She's doing an awesome job. So that's one of the changes, and the incoming salary was a bit higher than the current director's salary. But the main change that's contributing to what you see is the big percentage increase on the salary and wages is a different way of budgeting for one of the support positions in COA, which is the Meals on Wheels site coordinator. In prior years' budgets, they had only carried a portion of that position's wages, with the balance paid out of what's called a formula grant, which is issued by the Executive Office of Elder Affairs. That's not a fixed amount each year. It varies a little bit, but it's basically a pretty consistent. So in FY21 it was $99.60. I believe it was exactly that same amount in FY22. So in prior years, the portion of that position's wages have been paid directly from the formula grant, which is a totally legitimate use of those funds. When Christine came on board and was digging through the budget and how it was done, she and I put our heads together, and we both felt that the better way to account for this position would be to budget the true cost of the position in the operating budget. And then
sorry, sweetie, I think I'm good.
The formula grant can be used if there's supplemental hours needed, but that really accounts for part of the increase that you see. So it's basically level staffing budget, even though it shows as a significant increase percentage wise.
What's the will of the committee?
Make a motion to approve the Council on Aging budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Jim?
Oh, I did. I guess I just have on the fiscal year 2022. Only, if I'm reading this correctly, $23,600 out of $81,000 budget has been spent. Is that because of the timing of the hire, or is that?
Well, actually, so I have to be careful what I say because it's a workers' comp issue. But I'll just a former employee was a significant reduction of hours in FY22 because of a workers' comp. So that portion of that time is paid from workers' comp insurance, not from the operating budget. So that's why it's so significantly underspent here.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Angus, this question is for you. On page 5 of your packet here, you had a memo to the select board and you had a concept where you wanted to broaden the COA director responsibilities to include some administration of Parks and Rec. Is that part of the duties in the position that she's in, or is that?
So we added to the COA director job description basically oversight of another employee to assist with primarily with the field use reservations, because that's something that up until now hasn't been formally anyone's job, primarily due to the Tom Flaherty stepping down and a number of other factors. That's become much more bureaucratic and paperwork intensive, as I think you may have seen. So it has created a significant workload issue. So I am looking to resolve that. That's something you'll hear more about next week. It's not, so the director's got some umbrella responsibility to help kind of make sure that goes smoothly, but it's not the director's job. The director has a big job running the COA, so it's.
So if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, the director will oversee the person who will actually be responsible for doing it with regard to those responsibilities. Is that the idea?
That's the idea.
Okay.
That's
Thank
the
you.
idea.
And what office will that be? Person you.
That's we're still working on.
All right. I'll look forward to hearing next week then.
Good.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, we've had a motion, we've had a second, we've had discussion. All those in favor of the budget as presented?
Aye.
Unanimously passes. Next item up is planning. Thank you.
Okay. Planning, there was one kind of, I won't say last minute change because it's actually kind of been in the works for a while, but it was the select board did vote 8 days ago to support an increase in budgeted hours for the town planner from 25 hours a week, which has been the historical budget level, to 28. A little bit of background on this: the planner's office has taken on an increasing responsibility and really a host of areas, but including the stormwater, affordable housing, the scenic roads, even though that bylaw didn't change with the new DPW director and tree warden, many more things are being put through scenic road hearings than ever used to happen. So that's driven workload, as well as the planner's been very proactive on helping the community navigate with the MBTA communities legislation, and looking ahead to FY23, we have to update the housing production plan. So this had been a real workload issue that was kind of growing in the fall, and so Leah had approached me, and we had agreed that there's work that needs to be done. She was willing to do the work, so I brought it to the board, and she was authorized to basically increase hours up to 30 in any given work week as needed. And what we found over the last couple of months is her actual hours have averaged a bit above, close to 29 hours a week. So the initial planning board budget proposal had said, we're going to budget 25, but we're going to commit to 25. We want to budget for 30. I couldn't really get behind that. We don't do that for any other department. So over the course of the next month or so, we worked on, okay, so now the proposal is that the planner's going to work 28 hours a week, which I'm totally supportive of. There's a ton of work that needs to be done. And so I brought that to the board at their meeting last Monday. They were supportive of that. So the number that you have in front of you reflects 28 hours a week for the town planner in next year.
Okay. What's the will of the committee?
Make a motion to approve the planning budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
You want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
Very well.
Hey, hey Angus, it's
None, all
Tim.
those in favor of the budget as presented?
Oh, and actually, I do see Tim.
Yeah, sorry, just before you vote, I just wanted to elaborate
We
on.
have a special accommodation because Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Tim, did you have anything to add? Tim is the chair of the planning board.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Uh-oh. Can you hear me okay? Mm-mm.
Well, it passed, so.
Great.
I was just gonna ask for the sake of the minutes, could you please
Wow.
let me know your name? Sorry.
Oh, Leah Zambernardi, I'm the town planner.
Okay, thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Conservation.
All right, conservation, I'll take the opportunity to introduce our new conservation agent, Michelle Greene. Michelle was hired over the summer. We also have the chair of the Concom here, Judy Meisner. Michelle was hired over the summer. It's a joint position between West Newbury and Merrimack. That's a new structure. It's not that new in practice because, as you probably know, the former conservation agent worked in both towns, but that individual had two different employers, two different paychecks. It just kind of so happened that it aligned. So when that person retired from one town, then the other, we hired a part-time agent who was with us for about 2 years. And he did a nice job, but we knew it was going to be hard to retain a professional for a half-time position. So when that individual left, and that happened to coincide with our 2 time ago agent retirement from West Newbury, we reached out to Merrimack and said, we think both of our interests are served if we create a single full-time benefited position, advertise it as such, and we think we're gonna do a much better job with recruitment and retention if we can offer a professional situation rather than a half-time job. So that's what we did. It took a couple of months over the summer to get that MOU in place. But we did, we posted the job, we hired Michelle, and she's been doing a wonderful job. The initial hours breakdown in the MOU was 25 hours in West Newbury, 15 in Merrimack. For budgeting for FY23, we're carrying 27 and a half hours for Michelle, with Merrimack budgeting 12 and a half hours. So still with a combined 40 hours. We set up a special timesheet, so everything is recorded separately, everything's signed off on separately between each of the two towns, and it's worked out well. There's been, Michelle's got a very tough job. She is stretched very thin because it is a big job on both sides of the river, but she's doing a wonderful job. So I guess I go into this background because on paper, it looks like a very significant increase, and the wage that we're paying is somewhat higher than it was for the prior agent. But the main driver is that we're budgeting the gross cost of 40 hours. That's then offset by what Merrimack will pay us under the MOU. So the bottom line impact to your tax bill is the gross cost net of what we get from Merrimack. That doesn't show up in the expense budget, but it does show up in the tax rate.
Did you just roll vehicle allowance into expenses? I mean,
We did, yeah.
Because that's something we probably need now with the closed bridge more. than
Right.
ever.
We have talked about that. It's funny you bring that up, and because with the former agent, there was a fixed monthly stipend.
Yeah.
In general, I'm more favorable toward people putting in for mileage reimbursement than a stipend. So when we hired Michelle, that was how we set it up. She did approach me pretty recently, just partly on that topic of, especially with the two towns, it administratively gets to be an issue.
It's obviously a change too.
It's a reasonable expectation given the.
Yeah.
I don't know which side of the river you live on, but
The opposite side, which is now really impacted commute-wise from the
right.
Village Bridge, so.
Yeah, so that is something that I'm open to.
After this.
I'm definitely open to looking at like a travel stipend instead of, all the paperwork of mileage reimbursement, but we did roll it up together. It is still accounted for in the expense budget, but it's kind of rolled into a single line.
No, we obviously can do reserve fund transfers as necessary to accommodate this as needed through the end of the year too. So
yeah,
we'll be very understanding of what's going on with the current circumstances. So
Thank you.
Reasonable. Go.
make a motion to approve the conservation budget.
Is there a second? Is there any discussion?
This is one of those issues that is just, it's a contractual obligation. We really don't have a lot to do but say, we agree.
Well, we could do.
You
can do
The
A,
selectmen
so
have
we
a
don't-
contract signed, they signed the
Yeah.
deal with Merrimack, and so it seems pretty straightforward.
it is. Yeah, I don't want anyone to feel like you can't have your say, but yeah, it's kind of
It's not a
like.
hill I'm gonna die on, but.
It's a contradict, let's leave it at that.
Go ahead, Jim.
I have a question for, Michelle and or Judy. I don't mean it to be a loaded question, but do you actually think that you're doing 70% of the work for West Newbury and 30% for Merrimack?
Yeah, so I can actually tell you that every day I come in and I write down what time I come in, and then my day is counted for on a Post-it note, and I literally count to the 5-minute increment, work that I'm doing for West Newbury and work that I'm doing for Merrimack. So yeah, confidently, 100% what is being billed per each community is what I'm putting in there.
Thank you.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because with the nature of
I
the
can
job,
imagine.
I mean, let's say there's a wetlands violation and someone sees someone digging where they shouldn't be, and she gets a phone call and she's, across the river, and she gets a call from here or vice versa. She's part of her job is to respond and to kind of drop it. It's there have been a couple of times, in the last few months where payroll has gone above the budgeted hours. What I've told her is if there's work that needs to be done and you're willing to do it, I can kind of say that this year because the position was vacant for the first 2 months of the year. So we were underspending a little bit. So I was able to be a little flexible about, if there's a couple of extra hours, put it on your time sheet, it's our, labor law says we will pay you for that time. I think for next year where we're budgeting it at 40, we won't have that flexibility. And as you may have noticed in the narrative, the initial Concom proposed budget did look to budget additional hours as needed. I didn't carry that in my proposed budget. I think that is something, we can talk about. It's not something I explained, we've only budgeted overtime really historically for DPW, police, and dispatch. We haven't budgeted extra hours even for offices like conservation where it's an hourly position. That could create a bind if the actual work goes above 40. We are legally obligated to pay it under labor law. I think if that were to happen, and if that were to be, anything other than like a trivial amount, that would be a situation where I think we'd be looking for either a line item or reserve fund transfer. So the goal is to get the hours, get the work done within the budgeted hours. But as you know, this is a demanding community. Merrimack is too, and there's times that the agent's under pressure to do work above what's budgeted.
Anybody else?
I have another question, Gary. Will the proposed change to the wetlands protection bylaw, would that significantly, or could it significantly affect the number of hours that's worked by the conservation agent, or the responsibilities and money spent on from the Conservation Commission in general?
It could have some effect. We won't know. I mean, a lot of the bylaw expands some of the areas, but I still think that most of the filings would be required under the Wetlands Protection Act as it stands. There will be some additional work in terms of different, perhaps additional paperwork to address the bylaw issues. And it may require some enhanced inspections. And there will be some areas where there will be inspections where there wouldn't be under the Wetlands Protection Act, but we won't really know. It has the capacity to require additional hours, but we won't know that until if the town passes the bylaw.
Any other questions? Got a motion, we've got a second, we've got discussion. All those in favor of the budget as presented unanimously passes. Thank you. Library.
Okay, library, so I think everyone knows Corinne Flaherty, our library director. She's doing a great job. Corinne is in the third year of a 3-year contract. We did negotiate a new contract starting on July 1st, another 3-year contract that did carry a raise above COLA, well earned. So that is accounted for in the proposed budget. I would say, and Corinne may supplement this, but I would say the main dynamic on the library budget has been kind of some dialogue between the select board and the board of library trustees, myself, on wage budgeting, and without regard to the director, because that's accounted for here. But as I think I've mentioned, this committee, we're undertaking a comprehensive wage and classification study. That's a grant-funded study. We've engaged the Collins Center out of UMass Boston, which is really kind of the gold standard to do that type of work. And that is underway, but it's not going to be complete until May or June, and probably realistically June. And that's going to result in, of the 45 positions that are part of that scope, updated job descriptions, a recommended wage, kind of grade and step table, which is different than the range table that we have right now. And it includes an analysis of the labor market, which is kind of our regional market, not comparable to now in the Commonwealth, but here in our region. And it's going to advise whether the positions that we have in the departments are, paid at market, above market, below market. It's a very detailed study. It's a lot of work, and it's frankly long overdue. The library board did their own kind of analysis, which I included, all of that in the packet. And in my opinion, made a very compelling case that some number of their employees are undercompensated. I think they made a good case, but I also think we're doing a comprehensive study. And so the budget that was referred forward, other than the director's pay, which was already agreed with the contract, just carries an assumed 2% COLA. You know, I don't want to presuppose the outcome, but I do think there's a good chance the wage and classification study will probably find that some number of library employees are probably, you know, underpaid. But we don't want to get ahead of that, and we don't want to create a situation where there's a perception that anyone's kind of cutting the line, because that could be the case for any number of town departments. So the select board, its referral of the budget, said just carry COLA, and we'll try to rectify, you know, that along with any other findings of the study. So I do think that was the right decision of the board. I thought, frankly, it showed a lot of courage because they saw the same data I saw, and some of it's very compelling. We have one employee who's with the town for 49 years. You know, we have others with 10 years and 10 years, 20 years. So anyhow, this does not account for wage adjustments above COLA, other than for the director. That is the subject of ongoing study, as was the case with planning, and as was the case, really, it's comprehensive. So that is something that at the end of the day is going to be something the select board, you know, with their authority over wages, is going to basically find, you know, with recommendations from the study, and that my office brings forward, it's the select board that will make any of those changes. So, but that's not embedded within the budget. I am aware that is not what the Board of Library Trustees wanted to see. I've had, you know, really, good ongoing conversations. I think they understand the rationale of why it was proposed the way it was proposed. I just wanted to make sure that that comes through. The other big thing is the budget as proposed by the Board of Library Trustees, and so that's this column here, carried a new 10-hour-a-week position. For those of you who've been on the FinCom for a couple of years, that's going to ring a bell, because that was brought forward 2 years ago during, you know, and then of course COVID hit, and that was really taken out because with COVID there was so much uncertainty, it just wasn't the right time. Then last budget cycle it wasn't brought forward. This budget cycle it is brought forward, and I think it's fair to say that an hour-a-week position would be necessary to maintain the current level of service at the library. That includes the hours of operation. Because, and actually I'd love to have Corinne kind of supplement, because she's the one who does the staffing plan over there and has to fill all these shifts. But basically with the head count, the number of budgeted hours, it's very tough with the number of hours the library is open to cover all of those shifts. So the budget that I brought forward with the select board's referral doesn't carry that position. That could potentially lead to, or maybe even likely lead to, some modest reduction in the number of hours of operation. So I don't want anyone to not understand that.
But the budget as proposed, Angus, includes.
Does not include that, yeah.
So the department head budget includes that, but the town manager and selectman one does not.
Correct. And I do have a number in terms of what if let's say, you know, there was no change to the budgeted wages, but let's say, you know, that 10-hour week, the annualized cost I'm carrying is, or not carrying, but that it would be about $8,600 would be the cost of a new 10-hour week position. So that's not in the budget that's in front of you. So I'm here that Corinne, can we hear from her a little bit, just to supplement?
Yeah.
And covered a lot of ground. So.
Sure, so we've already closed 2 nights to try to deal with our lack of staffing or our understaffing situation, and that's helped significantly, but it's definitely made an impact on families, because families usually come in between 4 and 7, and now we're closing at 5, 2 nights a week when we were open at 8 previously. So, you know, it's helped the staff, but it's hurt the town. we're managing along at that rate. If we had the 10-hour position, we could put at least one night back and still maintain a staffing situation that wasn't always in crisis mode. It's challenging if we have one person on vacation and one person sick. I don't have someone to cover the other shifts because we need 3 in the building during the day to safely operate the building. And it's ideal if I'm not the third person, because if I am, I'm working circulation much of the day and shelving books, and the town's probably better served with me not doing that primarily. So that's the main reason that we're looking for the 10-hour position.
And then, could I ask a question here?
Well, we probably should have a motion in a second when we can ask.
Make a motion to approve the library budget.
Second.
Go ahead, Jim.
Question for Corinne. So that 25% or 10-hour, 25% of an FTE or 10 hours a week position. If I read the packet correctly, your anticipation of that is that you would actually have less overtime for staff. Did I understand that correctly, or did I miss the
To
point?
some extent. So the budget is that I inherited is set up so that Saturdays are, there's a $3,000 separate fund that's set aside to cover Saturdays and sick and vacations. So that we would need less in that, because we would have someone to cover those hours. Right now, people work on a shift every other Saturday. And we have some people working at a much higher rate than, a lower rate. It would make sense to try to put different staff on Saturdays, but I don't have the ability to do that because I don't have enough people.
I have questions.
Go ahead.
If this staff position were not to be filled, that additional, where would you look to make closures?
We likely would close 4 additional hours. And I don't know when I would do that right now. We're in the process of starting a strategic plan. And we're going to put out a survey to try to ask the town, what are the most convenient hours for them. I assume that Thursday afternoons would be the least impactful on the town. They tend to be our slowest days.
I guess my next question was going to be, of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, those 4 nights that you were typically open until 8 in the past, which 2 nights would have been the busiest in the past?
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Okay. I've looked at a lot of other surrounding communities' hours, and a lot of them have 2 nights that they're open, and it's typically not 2 back-to-back nights. It's usually spread out. Did you consider doing that when you cut the hours, or was it just we're going to cut the end of the week? How did you come to that decision?
Our evening hours are comparable on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We're busiest on Monday nights.
Okay.
But on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, they're fairly comparable.
Anything else? Go ahead.
Gary and Jim, I don't know how this fits in with your alternatives and whatnot, but I know that a lot of tutoring from paid school that's needed for kids that are really on the cusp of becoming average or good grade students, but I'm not going to make it with these teachers that come in. A lot of them are retired. I watch them, and these teachers are glued to these kids. I mean, they're like, especially for reading, they're like 1 foot away from them, staring in their faces to make things happen. And in the last bunch of years, because of what's happened with the teen section, the link between that library and the entire Kentucky system, the high school, has really improved hugely. It's like an arm of the high school and the page in the middle school. in a way that's never been before, so.
Yeah, I agree with that comment. I think it would be best to have the library open more nights a week. In fact, I would have rather seen hours cut from the early part of the day. See the library open at 12 or even 1 o'clock rather than being closed earlier.
You'd be surprised how busy it is in the morning. We have an afternoon lull.
But you also do a lot of night programming, and if the library suddenly closed at night, you only have 2 nights that programming can occur rather than 4, 5. A lot of programming I've seen in the past occurs on Wednesday nights, and now suddenly that's not a night where programming in theory would be occurring because the library's closed.
We've been virtually doing programming since the pandemic. We haven't gone back to in person, mostly because we don't have the physical space to do it. Now that we're doing virtual, we get many more people attending our programs because there wasn't room in the building previously. So I'm not sure what the future of programming is going to look like, but based on the fact that this community seems to be more enthusiastic with virtual programming. And we've had programming all nights of the week with the exception of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
My comment about the hours though too, looking at other surrounding communities, a lot of communities are doing that with their hours rather than they're cutting the early part of the day and they're open many more days early at the beginning of the day. 6 of the days they're all opening at 10 or 9, or we are, whereas others it's cutting it down to 4 days that they're opening early and staggering it to account for the fact that scheduling is more difficult for a family than someone who's retired. You know, I know people who use the library during those early hours, and it's not a big deal as much for a lot of those people to pick a different day compared to the families where it's this sports team is on that night, dance is on the other night, and suddenly the library's closed on the 2 nights that we could have gone. I agree that it's having a significant impact on people, but I think that it could have been more flexible by reducing the hours on the other end.
Chris has a question.
As I recall, this is going back 6 or 7 years, the high school or the middle school, one of the 2 libraries, because of the modular units decaying and being removed, their libraries are being used as classrooms. And in essence, what the town was saying at the time was, well, the kids can use the town's libraries, but now it's saying you don't have enough hours at the town libraries. Does this committee, I mean, Angus said it's $8,200. If
It was 86.
okay, whatever the number is, do we have the appreciate the preciseness. Can we add that in and suggest that?
We absolutely, we can amend. I mean, so we've had a motion in a second. If they're both rescinded, then, you know, someone could make a motion and say, I'd like to increase, you know.
I'd like to go in that direction. I mean, if,
Did you second?
yeah.
All right, so.
I make a motion to include the.
We need to clean up our
Fine.
first.
Before we clean it up, let's just finish, make sure we have all our questions up before we do.
Right, I guess my comment on that is if it's $8,600 and we want to spend $8,600 to put, or $8,000 for chairs in this room, the benefit that the library gives the community, in my mind.
Well,
is-
maybe, you know, it's all kind of subjective, but I agree.
I know.
And I the money thing is not, you know,
So-
the 8,600, I think is worth it for the benefit the community gets from the library, in my opinion.
So, okay, let's unwind it and figure out how we move forward, please.
Does anybody else have?
Yeah, and then, go ahead.
Continuing with the hours things, if we put that position back, is that only going to bring 1 night back, or could we consider changing these hours where we get both nights back and pull back on maybe 1 day where things are starting at noon instead? I think.
I'm totally open to changing the hours. It's one of the things I want to ask the community. It's not my decision to make. I think that if we closed one morning and opened at 12 on a Thursday possibly, and put those hours on a Wednesday night, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I don't want to make the decision until I get feedback from the town.
So
The goal is to reopen at least one of those nights.
he's withdrawn. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, along those lines, I would have a question for Angus then. The 8,600 approximate cost, Angus, I'm assuming then there wouldn't be anything obviously for healthcare, nothing else for, you know, any other.
Correct. I mean, you know, we carry the 1.45% for FICA, you know, that's $124.
Yeah.
But the way I budget FICA, I round up a little bit, so that's a de minimis amount.
Okay.
That position wouldn't be eligible for
Right.
insurance.
No health insurance, no.
Or anything else, I guess.
Yeah,
Insurance
no,
is just money.
yeah, no,
10 hours a
right,
week.
right, yeah.
That's what I thought too.
I appreciate your comment about reaching out to the community for, in feedback. Ultimately, you are the one that makes the choice of the library hours, though. Is that correct? Or is that someone else?
The board and myself.
Okay, so together with the board, that's the authority who makes the choice. It's not Mr. Jennings, right?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I guess I would like to amend the motion
We gotta clean that up. So are you gonna withdraw?
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise, we just vote and start over. Go ahead, Jay.
I would like to make a motion to include the 10-hour per week, 0.25% FTE into the budget, and leave everything else as it stands.
At $8,600 per year.
So that would increase the wage to
13.
Point of order.
Approximately.
Would that then need to change the total spending on periodicals and books because of the 19% rule?
We're at 20%, so I could do some quick math.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's.
No, but you're right.
It's important.
There is a bit of,
I have some wiggle room with that.
Yeah, there
with
is a little
regards to
wiggle room.
If you're open more hours than the state requires, I can, which we are, I can make, they will make an exception to some degree with the 19.5%
Okay. What is the state requirement?
for open hours.
Yeah.
15 hours a week.
Oh, wow. I thank you. I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing. It goes by population.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Another question, Gary, too?
you made your motion.
I'll second
Yeah.
it.
Okay, we gotta second it. Go ahead, John.
My question then would be for either Wendy or Angus. The select board, when they reviewed this, why did you make a decision not to go for that extra 10-hour per week position?
I mean, I'll start, and then, as you know, I prepare the budget, I give it to the board can revise it before it goes to you. So I think, it's a level of service discussion. There's a clear connection between the budgeted hours and the hours of service. Our library is open more hours than other towns our size significantly. And, we knew we were going to have some major school increases, insurance, retirement, and so forth. It didn't feel like the right time. But, I'm not opposed to it. I'm sure the select board's not opposed to it. It's more just, we got to meet the bottom line of the budget. There's a lot of things we'd like to do that we can't do. But Wendy, do you want to supplement?
I personally think it's great to add that because, the library is open more than other towns, but it's very heavily used, by all segments of our population. So I would be in favor of making that change.
Anybody else have anything else they'd like to add?
I would, just two things. I would say, so the 78,000 that's proposed for books and periodicals is above the threshold, even with if the budget's amended. And secondly, we are carrying the $3,000 that Corinne referred to. My thought would be we keep that as is, rather than try to get too cute of like, we're reducing that because, and then maybe after a year of data, we can, but that's not a lot of money to carry for contingency on staffing,
So we've had a motion, we've had an amended motion, we've had a second, we've had discussion. All those in favor of the amended library budget as presented unanimously passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Special counsel.
I look forward to seeing the results of the survey from the town.
All right, this is another, dynamic area of the budget. As everyone knows, up until through last July, we had in-house town council with Michael Karen, and he stepped down. We outsourced. We already had KP Law under contract as outside counsel, primarily for personnel and or labor and kind of as needed work, including in land use. But the legal costs, I have the chart that I put in there. For the blue line is the FY21. And you can see with outside counsel, we had the one spike in February, the 4,300, but it was averaged about $1,900 a month as outside counsel. You can see very clearly, once they became general counsel, the monthly billings went up quite a bit. That's not a surprise. There have been, in addition to just the learning curve of kind of now all of a sudden, instead of focusing on hyper-specific things, they're now needing to get into everything. Contracts, town meeting warrants, motions, we actually, to this point, haven't gotten very involved with, for instance, like bargaining union contracts, because we kind of got a good template, we're not looking to drive up the legal bill, but we've had some pretty extraordinary challenges and, especially through the fall. There were, some specific issues that were driving costs, driving time. So what we did is when we, basically I give a monthly report to the select board of that month's legal bill. And I give an updated chart that you see, they see an update every month. So since they are the appointing authority for town council, and town council, really reports to the select board as the chief elected body. So, it's obviously a big cost increase from year to year. But that is, part of the price we pay by having contracted counsel instead of in-house. So I do think the level of service has been excellent. And there have been some very, for instance, I named just a couple of things here, but like the shared agreement with Merrimack, or the shared MOU with Amesbury for cost reimbursement for the regional vaccine clinics. Those are the kinds of things that don't come up every year, but they were pretty time intensive. And then, as I said, things like, purchasing, procurement, contracting, collective bargaining, that all kind of involves council review. So I did revise this downward a little bit from what I had initially put out back in the end of February, because the January bill, you can see, brought down that monthly average, with it being $2,800. That was the lowest bill we'd seen since they've been general counsel. That gives me some optimism that, we'll see where it normalizes. I kind of hope it's not $6,000 a month. What I did do is I budgeted basically the year-to-date amount at 90% of that, because there was a backlog, there were some things undone, and that drove some of the time. So the rationale of the budgeting is to kind of annualize the year-to-date times 0.9, and that's the logic behind it.
Make a motion to approve the special counsel budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Question.
Go ahead.
Previously, when our town clerk was also our counsel, there was a separate line item for that, I assume?
It was actually embedded in the town clerk council budget. It was marked town clerk / council.
And we had developed a special counsel
That's right.
line item that had occurred within our tenure on this board for some issues that had come up.
He couldn't handle
that it wasn't appropriate for him to handle even. So
I guess my question is this comparable to what we were paying for our in-house counsel previously in a relative way?
I think if you add this to what we're paying the town clerk, it's significantly above the salary of the former clerk counsel. If you take what we were paying the former clerk counsel and add what we were paying for special counsel, that definitely gets it a bit closer. So for instance, in FY21, we paid about $23,000 to outside counsel. If you add the proposed budgeted amount of $65,000 to, it's probably maybe in round numbers, the combined is maybe $10,000 above. Like this plus town clerk is probably about $10,000 above town clerk.
Well, I'm just saying it's a perception of the numbers. It's not as big it's not unreasonable based on what we previously had paid.
That's right. It's
Just when you get to a
offset
town
because
meeting.
obviously we're paying the town clerk, significantly less than we were paying the town clerk council. So yeah, that is an offset, and that's a really good point that I'll make sure to have a tighter grasp of the number for town meeting.
Yeah,
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? We've got a motion, we've got a second. All those in favor of the budget? Unanimously passes. Historical Commission.
All right, this is a level funded budget. at $600. I know Bob's here, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but it's not a lot of drama in this budget.
Make a motion to approve the historical commission budget.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor of the budget as presented, unanimously
I think we have an
passes.
article on this one too.
We do, yep, and this will ring a bell from, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago with the historic property survey.
Yep.
There was the CPC funding for 12.5.
Yep.
But the grant that's been applied for is 30,000 with a 50% match. So we have 12.5 secured with the prior CPC, that left a $2,500 gap. So that's proposed as a separate warrant article. There was some consideration of proposing that as CPC, but the amount of overhead to do a CPC project for $2,500, it's really not worth it. So let's put it through as free cash.
Make a motion to approve the historic survey number 3 article.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I remember Gary really was a big fan of this, and I'm sure he's a fan of it still.
I think it's great. People are excited. You got a little flyer, it talks about your house. If you're lucky / cursed enough to have an old one. And it's pretty neat. I used to make ballet shoes in my house. And it was an industrial part of town, which is crazy. So I think it's a good thing, a good program, and people enjoy it. I certainly did.
Does there have to be a sunset on this one?
That's a great question. I was gonna say that we forgot to do sunsets on last weekend.
Oh, boy.
There was some in there.
We have a little bit of work to do.
Cleanup. That'll be a cleanup.
We don't need a new meeting for that, just that.
Okay.
All right, so did we get up?
We did,
in a second?
yeah.
Any other discussion on this? All those in favor of the article?
I'm assigning you to write this one.
Okay, fine.
It's just a cut and paste though.
I can probably make that work.
Honestly.
Just go back in time.
Right, I know.
And I think I have the antenna too. All right, do we have anything else?
We have open space committee.
I meant historical.
Oh, for historical.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, John.
Open space committee.
So John Dodge couldn't be here, but he sent me a brief narrative. He asked me to read. That's just a couple of sentences. So the open space committee is asking for $750 for FY23, which represents no increase over our FY22 budget. In the past, we've spent it on 1 or 2 guest speakers, flyers, posters, banners, trail markers, refreshments for the annual open space committee walk, and other occasional low-cost items. Thank you for considering our FY23 budget request. Just came in yesterday.
750, you said, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Because it said 15 on the.
Well, they had initially proposed 15, and that's what I put under the department had proposed. I carried 750. I reached out to John. I said, John, I need a justification, even though it's not a lot of money. It's just a double a budget. And he talked about potential interest in signage. And I told him, we carry money in the DPW budget for signage, and when we need signage, we pay it out of that line. So I said, there's never going to be a time where, because I know what he's thinking of is new signage at Pipe Stave. We're actively doing new signage at Pipe Stave. It's going to be paid out of DPW operating budget. So basically, I told him, like, there's never going to be a time that you want signs that we're like, oh, we can't afford it. Like, I'd rather just pay it out of the DPW sign line rather than start bulking out these.
Make a motion to approve open space budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
And John was good with that.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the open space budget as presented unanimously passes. Cultural Council.
So this is really kind of a placeholder budget year after year. Cultural Council primarily is funded through the grants, from the state. So we like to have an expense budget in case there is any incidental cost. In a typical budget year, there's not. Everything there, it's not formally a revolving fund, but it kind of works that way. They get $400 from the state to support a specific program. We cut a check for $400 to that program. So we're kind of like a pass-through for our Cultural Council program. Stephanie, do you want us, I know you're more into the accounting for that. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Make a motion to approve the Cultural Council budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the Cultural Council budget as presented unanimously passes. So
Bandstand, Mill Pond.
I thought we dealt with Mill Pond, didn't we, when we had?
I don't think we did know.
I don't think so.
Okay, all right.
It's not on the agenda.
Was it?
No, it's not,
Never mind.
Maybe.
I think I had that on, let's see where.
It was not, didn't make the cut.
Yeah, no, I guess I forgot
We
to.
need some benches.
Oh, no, it wasn't, oh, it's
It's
on.
on, it's
Oh,
on the
it's
schedule, but it's not on the
this one,
agenda.
but it's not on the agenda, okay. And I think I know why, because on the initial, we had Park and Rec for tonight. They were supposed to meet last week, instead they're meeting tonight, so that was pushed back a week.
Right.
And I think I was assuming that Mill Pond would be the same night.
We moved
Is there gonna be
special
a lot- is
counsel.
there gonna be a lot of backup material on those budgets?
Not on Mill Pond, not any,
Okay.
but on Park and Rec, there's some dynamics there.
No bandstand.
Bandstand, no, I was in touch with Brian Young, he's our bandstand coordinator, and he verified that is the same budget number, it works for him.
I feel comfortable moving forward on these based on past experience. So I don't know how you feel.
Can you?
I don't know if it's a violation of the open meeting law to
I
discuss
guess
something.
it was on, you're right, it was not on that, it was
Yeah.
on our, it was on our alleged, on our 4-week agenda, but not on our.
Right.
So I guess it needs to go on to next week, you're right.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody wants to talk about it.
It's gonna take-
God forbid if
right.
they did.
But it certainly won't have much time.
Reasonably anticipated?
It was anticipated, it's just, it was deleted.
Yeah, we just put it up for next.
It's
next time.
business, yeah. it's
We'll add
not,
5 minutes to do both of those
Let's
things.
not make things
So
hard.
anyway, I guess we're at education.
We are at education, and Greg should be here in about 10 minutes, so let's start with both Whittier and Essex. And I know,
Thank you.
well, I know Nathan typically refuses on.
Typically not, typically always.
Yeah. So the proposed Whittier budget is really entirely driven, well, not entirely, but mostly driven by 5 additional students next year. There is so we had Whittier scheduled to attend the select board's meeting last Monday, but that ended up getting postponed because that turned into kind of a monster agenda. So we've got them coming later this spring. But let's see. Yeah, we're going from 9 to 14 students in Whittier, so that's what's behind that.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the Whittier budget as presented.
Second.
Is there any discussion other than Mr. Kelly, who's not discussing it? It's a formula, they just plug in the kids and that's.
Well, the
spits
problem with Whittier is you have so many, I think there's 13 different communities involved with it.
We're a small fish, I know that.
Well, I know, and you've got to get somebody that, it becomes irrelevant what we do. I was on the Whittier School Committee. You would have to get, Amesbury and Havel to have any opposition to the budget to make any difference. So it generally is what they put out and stuck with it.
So if I understand this right, we're paying almost 20,000 a year per student, is that what we're paying?
Bingo.
That's right.
And the frustrating part is Haverhill pays like $9,000 per student
Why is that?
because of economic drivers that work out the formula. Property
State
property
funding,
value
state
and,
funding.
per capita income and things like that.
Chapter 70 school state reimbursement.
Send them to Harvard.
It's good. No, you couldn't, but you could take care of most of UMass. I can tell you that. It's true. Take care of the lion's share of the University of Massachusetts.
We got to get you updated, Walt, if you think that's fair.
It's 4 times that a year, I think. Anyway, okay, any other discussion?
I think Whittier is a valuable education for the kids. It's just the cost is very difficult to swallow based on what we pay for our in-district kids. So it's the nature of
Apples and oranges comparison.
but
I mean, I don't disagree with your point, but it's not an apples to apples thing.
no, not at all. So
We basically don't have any choice.
We do know.
I mean, even if you vote no, it's still going to pass because
They're gonna take it off the bottom, so. All right, so we've got a motion, we've got a second, we've had discussion, all those in favor of the budget, 4, 1 abstention.
4-0.
Okay. The Aggie.
Essex Ag is, we're carrying a budget based on 2 students. You can see our year-to-date is a little bit lower than percentage, and that's, I think we, slightly over budgeted this year in terms of, I think it was transportation costs. So the proposed number, even though it shows a slight reduction, is basically a level funded budget. As noted in the notes, the tuition isn't set formally until April by the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So the per student budgeting is based on information given to us by Essex as kind of their best guess, but it's not necessarily final. So I think if that number were to change based on the DESI vote in April, probably the thing to do, notify the FinCom, and depending on where we are with producing the booklet, and if you're to read again. But the other thing that can happen every year with Essex is this is based on projected enrollment. Actual enrollment's not known until October 1st. So as you've seen, I think it happened 2 years ago that we had budgeted for 1, it ended up being 2. So we had to go back in the fall town meeting to add the budgeting for a second student. The business manager at Essex Ag, Marie, did say to me, like, you can just budget for 3. And I said, that's a lot of money. I think I'll just budget for 2. And if it is 3, we'll go back in the fall. I didn't want to, bring forward an extra $21,000 or $22,000 just in case, but I want you to be clear that if actual enrollment is more than 2, we would need to come back in the fall.
Make a motion to approve Essex Tech budget.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the Essex Tech budget as presented unanimously passes. Now we wait for Greg.
We could consider working on sunset classes during this time.
We could work on sunset classes. What were the articles we did last time?
Well, let's go back to the first meeting. Were there any in that?
I don't think we did any.
No, we didn't.
Articles
In the first meeting, okay. We had a facilities improvement article. I mean, a lot of these
cut that to pieces.
We broke it into 3 or 4 things though. But is Wayne going to be at our last meeting?
I can invite him.
It might be appropriate to talk to Wayne.
Yeah, we're going to need to have some feedback from him before we just start arbitrarily.
I don't want to tear apart his, because he gives us a lot of valuable feedback about sunsets sometimes.
Yeah,
and it's not appropriate to just leave no sunsets.
Yep.
Town office phone system. Oh, that's still. I mean,
is that your thing, Angus?
That's this year, isn't it?
No.
The
procurement and contracting could take.
Okay.
FY. I mean, hopefully the work would be underway within FY23, but I wouldn't say that all the funding would be spent in FY23.
Okay.
I would think 2 years is safe, but if I'd want to talk to Wayne about that.
Okay. Several. I mean, it's most of them. Okay, so it's purchase of 6 AED devices.
That would be
fiscal year. FY24.
Yeah. Make a motion to.
No, FY23.
Is it 23?
Okay.
Yeah.
Make a motion to add a sunset clause to the article that covers the purchase of 6 AED devices to the end of fiscal year 23.
Second, any discussion? You know what a sunset is?
Yeah, I do. My comment shouldn't, when the warrants come in, shouldn't there be a little box on the bottom, sunset 1, 2, 3, 4 years, just check it off so we don't have to go there again?
That's a good idea. I don't know if we have it on there.
You must have
Is
a
it part of the
form
form?
they fill out for the warrants, right?
Not everyone fills out a form.
They don't all come in the same format.
Maybe that would be a requirement, have a generic cover sheet on the form.
I generally don't fill out forms for articles either. I don't have time to fill out forms.
But the people submitting could, is what I'm saying. If we
They
did
could. I mean, the approach I've taken is if you get me the article and it's clear, I'm not big on it's got to be in this form. We're a small town.
okay, from now I'll be all over every one of them.
We're typically having, we forgot one.
Where do I go back, yes?
Yeah.
All right.
There's a motion and a second.
We've got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on the sunset on this article? All those in favor of the sunset as amended?
The fiscal year 23.
23, yeah.
passes unanimously.
Next up would be rescue airbag system. I think that would be done within 2 years. You know, we could ask Mike to come.
Yeah, and that ought to be able to be done.
Fiscal
within the next
23,
fiscal year,
okay.
yeah.
So make a motion to add a sunset clause onto the rescue airbag system article of the end of fiscal year 23.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the sunset is added.
Okay, and the next one,
Unanimously
I'm
passes.
gonna say the same date is the rescue tools and power tools. I think that would be quick as well. So I make a motion to add a sunset clause to the rescue tools and power tools for fire saws article of the end of fiscal year 23.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous.
The only other one we have
Antenna?
seen the antenna one. Is that
We need some
timeline on that, or is it DPW, or maybe a quick email to Mike could get you that info later? Not today.
DPW is gonna be involved, because remember, there's a purchasing, so there's a procurement.
All right, so we need Wayne here for sunsets, and let's get him in and out of here quick. So he
Yeah, we'll
doesn't
do it
spend the night.
first.
The
Yeah.
Page School studies have sunsets?
We'll have to talk to him.
That's he'll be here
But
anyway
you
for
just
that
didn't
one.
mention, I'm just.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a good comment, but I think we can just wrap that in.
So actually, I'm looking at the article request form for the.
Some of them did that, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's showing June 30th, 2024 for the $39,000 one is in the request.
Okay, so make a motion to add a sunset clause of June 30th, 2024 to the Page School study article.
Second.
Well, there was two of them, though.
Yeah,
One of
there's
them
two.
was
That's the study.
Staying.
study.
That's the safety assessment and safety and assessment study.
The 85,000 one.
One was
Yes.
masonry and the other was.
Yep.
the interior.
That's a different, yeah. The other one is the exterior evaluation article.
Correct, yeah.
So this is the overall study.
I think I second.
You did.
Okay, any
And that
discussion?
one was again 2024. Which was that?
It was the date that you said. It was June 30th, 2024.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
yeah,
on the submission.
yeah, that's what it is.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the sunset? Unanimously passes.
Would you mind looking back 2
Yeah,
pages?
The communications was also 2024.
And how about the 2 pages earlier, the exterior evaluation?
Sure.
You could just
2024, June 30.
collectively motion on both.
Okay, I'm gonna make a motion to add a sunset date of the end of fiscal year 23 to the Page School exterior evaluation article and the
The antenna.
public safety emergency communication equipment onto the Page School article.
Those, in the request, those are both shown as 24.
24, yeah.
Oh.
No,
So
23.
the end of
Yeah.
fiscal year 2024.
Right.
Sorry, the end of fiscal year 2024.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimously passes. Okay.
Hey, it's a mouthful saying all that.
I know, absolutely. I'm glad you did it.
And I think I saw one more.
So we'll have to talk about the facility improvement article, the town office phone system, the electric truck, the F-550, the Emerald Ash Borer study,
That one's actually, that one I'm looking at, he did put in the end of next fiscal year.
The Emerald Ash Borer.
The Emerald Ash Borer.
okay? Make a motion to add a sunset clause onto the Emerald Ash Borer study article of the end of fiscal year 23.
Second. Any discussion?
Question. Do
Go.
we have to do these where he's already got it? We already voted
We
that.
still,
Yeah,
yeah,
we have to add the
This is
sunsets
our-
and additional.
we ultimately decide when it's gonna
Okay.
happen.
Thank you.
Because if we want to add or subtract time, and we do it in consultation, we usually agree, but there are times we say, hey, you need to go a little faster
I
on
didn't
that.
know if we were voting, we voted exactly what they gave on the paper.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
So any other discussion? All those in favor? Okay, I think that's it.
so there'll be 4 to work on.
Okay.
So it's the facilities improvement potpourri, the town office phone system, the electric truck, and the F-550. Those are the 4 that we need to talk to Wayne about.
Okay. My guess is the electric truck, we're gonna be talking FY24, just because of the lead time. We're hearing it could be up to a year after you order it before you actually have the truck in hand, so.
Sure.
That's my guess, but we'll get confirmation.
Thank you.
Okay.
And did we put one on the article we voted tonight for the historical, for the historical commission?
I thought you did.
Did we?
End of the year.
I don't know if we did not.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
I don't know if
They didn't have the end of June.
Yeah.
Did we do it? Okay, good.
Yeah, they're looking, the end of June 2023.
Sorry, we were just trying to fill some time in between.
No, take your time.
So,
Thanks for having us, being flexible.
Yeah.
Of course. So we're ready for you guys.
Okay.
all right.
Did you want to just do that sunset
Yeah.
or the
Did
historical?
we not do it?
No.
Wendy
Okay.
said- Wendy said-
I'd like I'd like to make a motion to add a sunset clause of the end of fiscal year 23 to the historical commission number 3 article.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor, unanimously passes. Howard,
You went through all those other town departments in an hour?
Gary runs a tight ship.
we're animals. We're animals.
We read the material beforehand and we come prepared.
Yeah.
So we know what we're gonna discuss.
We're crabby about the packet. It helps.
Where would you like us?
Wherever
Wherever
you're
you're
most comfortable.
I think I do want to make sure we have the sound going through these mics. So if you could either sit at the table or the front row is fine. And then Greg, I think I sent you the link to the packet. We have all the materials. So if there's anything you want me to go through the slides or whatever, I don't know.
I'd like to run through the slides a little bit. We could probably augment them a little bit. There's been a couple little changes that we probably didn't get that Justin put together for another little presentation, but they're more towards the fiscal side, where this is more towards the programmatic side that you're about to see.
So I have the early info from February, and then I have these historical financial comparison slides. And then I have the actual.
We've got some of the updated financial stuff, some of the stuff that we see from Justin, you notice the date.
Right.
From some of it even before that is January 11th, that was before the governor's budget came out, so there's been some obvious changes, things rolling around, but we'd be happy to go through the slides and tell you what they mean and do a little addition as we go through it, where some things pop in and out. And since I'm horrible at public speaking, I'm gonna let the assistant superintendent.
Before you guys start, I have one quick question for Angus.
Yep.
There has been some back and forth about from a few different people, a few different things about whether, based on the current budget that's before us tonight, whether a override vote is going to be required by the town of West Newbury. There was an article in the paper that suggested it would be required. I believe you and I spoke and said that it would not be required.
The article I read said it wouldn't be required.
I believe the article,
earlier one.
an early one said that
More recently.
approximately $306,000 override vote would be required by the town of West Newbury.
Yeah.
I believe you and I spoke last week and
That's
said
right.
that's not required.
Correct.
I spoke to a member of the Groveland Board of Selectmen who I know, and she had said that she heard you say, or said to her, someone that she heard you say that it would be required at some meeting.
No, I did not
So
say that.
if that's a miscommunication, she said that to me today, so I just wanted to get that clarified.
No, in the Pawtucket budget information, it includes estimated override per town. That's information they prepared that we didn't ever review or see.
Right.
By our math, we do not need an override. There's actually a fair amount of play above the budget number that could be absorbed without an override.
And is that because of the $200,000 reduction that we got in after this
No, even
second budget?
before that,
Okay.
even before that. It's really because we have a higher levy limit because of debt exclusions and things over the years. So we do have more play than the other two towns. So I think the confusion was created by, Pawtucket, no offense, but by, we kind of presented an override number.
Sure.
Without ever running it through the town halls. We don't need an override to absorb this.
Thank you for clarifying.
What about the other?
I did get a call from Jim Sullivan, the reporter from the Newbury Report News last Wednesday, and I talked to him at some length, and he did run an article more recently that made it clear that West Newbury is not proposing an override. Because if we were, we would have had the select board would have had to refer to the ballot last Monday, a week ago.
Okay.
So
thank you.
And just as a clarification of that, as you spoke of, we had a school committee member who asked me to prepare scenarios that you see in the thing. All that was based upon is normally we go 3% before the governor's budget comes out for two-step, starts moving its head around for the evaluation of the assessments. So I just put, if it was over 3%, that amount, I just made up an override calculator for it for all three towns. and I was very specific about it, that each town can have no override or make the override for whatever amount they want. I just made one up for over 3% because it kind of gave people a guesstimate of what we were looking at. So, and we never told the paper anybody needed anything. So, wherever that came from, it wasn't us. That is totally the town's purview. We understand that.
Okay, let's get started.
Sure.
I'm Brent Conway, I'm the Assistant Superintendent.
Nice to meet you. Thank you
Nice
for
to meet
coming.
you all. Dr. Bartholomew, we have a school committee meeting going on at the same time, so he's here. And I get the pleasure of joining this fine gentleman.
Doesn't mean Dr. Bartholomew will come running in
He may.
20 minutes if we're still going. He may come running in.
He may.
So, Brent, do you have slides that I have or different slides? Or are they
Looks as
on
though-
are they on a website? Because I can pull up a site if they're on that Pentucket budget site.
He might have put them on there. He added one after the governor's budget came out a little bit, but it didn't change much from this, but it added a couple different things.
So the front cover would say budget information, history and current.
Okay, yeah, I don't have that.
If I can get you, send it.
No,
Go
we
to,
can talk about that.
go
after,
to,
if you like.
We have
school committee, I'm sorry. School committee, and then budget documents, 2022-23.
Yeah.
And he has his historical financial comparisons, class size.
They have it here, I can send it.
Was it early budget? Well, it's gonna be one of these right here, was it early budget information?
It's. It was.
I have the early budget information was part of the
Budget
packet.
scenario wasn't there, proposed budget amendments.
We have
that's
numbers
updated.
in our packet, don't we?
Oh, once updated budget information.
Yeah,
fiscal
So
15.
that's something new to show.
That looks
It's
like.
on the website.
Let me see. if
This is
that's
actually
a
dated,
month ago.
so this one is dated, yeah, that's it, that's the one,
That's the
okay,
one.
that works. Yeah,
We go with this one, the other one everybody's seen about 10 times already.
yep. So you can proceed through a couple of these. So we talked about just a few of those per pupil expenditure, net school spending, just to give you a sense of where we compare in the things that we use. And then when we look at who are some of the school districts, these are called dark districts. And those are districts who have very similar socioeconomic and demographic makeup and student population. So not necessarily the towns itself, but from a student population. So you can see some of these we know, right? They're close to us. Masco, Newburyport, North Reading. We actually compare to them in other ways, Hamilton, Wetland. Some of them you may not be all that familiar with, and they're in different parts of the state. So sometimes we look at those, and then we like to look at who are those dark districts, plus some neighboring districts. We often like to think of and compare ourselves with Triton, yet they have some different demographics than we do, student demographics, but their makeup of the three towns, a lot of that comes into play here too. What we don't do is we don't use Haverhill, for instance. Haverhill's demographics are different from us. Their budget is considerably different from ours. And then these are our neighboring districts, Amesbury, Georgetown, Triton. So we like to sort of see, we're trying to compare, why are we where we are? Why are we asking? And for the money seems to be so much different than it is. So we like to go back, we can keep going here to the next slide. So we look at some of the history here per pupil expenditure, and that is all our operating expenses divided by the number of students. So we're about 2,400 students, give or take. And I think we've kind of bottomed out on our enrollment, and we're sort of on our way back up a little bit. But we're sort of at our low point for enrollment. So how do we match up? And we can compare this. You can see versus state average and then over. So PPE, per pupil expenditure versus the state average. So you can see just over the 13 years, the past 13 years, there's almost $1,500 PRSD as far as a deficit. So $1,500 averaging less than the state average per pupil. And
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you also compare results, and that is, are there test results? Or
It's coming.
Okay. That's what I want to know. What are we getting for our money?
Sure. And that's the average. You can see that average came down a little bit over the last 5 years, but it jumped back up in 2020. We don't have 21 numbers to compare against, so we can go to the next slide. And this is the neighboring districts. You can see it continues to climb versus neighboring districts. And then you go one more, go back one, sorry, go back one more, there you are. And this is versus those Cal districts, so the districts that are similar to us, you can see even by 2020, it was an over $1,800 difference per student. So, and we're spending, our per pupil expenditure at this point is around just under 17, I believe, so 16 something, and the Cal average is up over $18,000 per student. So, and then we can keep on going. After, go one more, similar slide, net school spending.
Before we go to this one, sure, the quick one that always baffles us all. We don't really care about per pupil spending. If our kids are doing fine, and we're at the bottom of it, right? Great. If we have everything we need and we're the cheapest, that just means we're more efficient. We don't look at that as a benchmark that we have to meet the top. I mean, I will tell you that the highest per pupil spending district in the world is Washington DC. And I don't think they want any of our kids to go there. So, you know, it's for the current purposes, because if we had everything we need, that would mean nothing to us.
Sure, you'd be getting a bargain, right? Net school spending, sort of another way to look at this, the state expects, and what you're going to see here is it expects you to be at a minimum of 100%. So basically every district in the state of Massachusetts spends above and beyond the 100%. What makes up that 100% varies from district to district. Some of the more urban districts who have less money coming in from their community get a lot more from state and federal government, whereas some communities like us, we have a lot less of that. So therefore, the local communities make up more of that. So if you go to the next slide, these numbers on the right, the percentage, that's the percentage over the deficit. What you see here on the left, you see the state average. So over 12, just let's look at FY19, just for that sake. The state average, people were spending 26% above the 100%. Right, that's what the district's average, and really no one spends under 100. You actually get clobbered if you do. We were only spending 16% above the net school spending, what the state says we need to spend. And again, it's okay if we're getting the results we want, but the deficit, you can see that has changed year after year after year. The difference going back 12 years was only 5.91%, and it's now up over 10% in the difference. So if you go to the next slide, you can see we compare that to those Cal leagues, not just the state, and that difference is massive. And the way it has changed over the course of the over 12 years. And that if you go back around that 11% 12 years ago, I'm going to show you the graph in a minute, it jumped, and then really over the last 7-8 years, that's where you have really seen this gap begin to grow between our surrounding communities. So we can go one more slide, and these are our neighboring districts. Again, reports and so forth near us, Georgetown, Triton. That gap resembles sort of the Cal League difference of 21.5%. So the towns around us are spending a lot more on education than we are. So we'll go to the next one. So what would that mean, just for if we were talking about this, go to the next slide. So if we were spending at the state average as a school district, we'd have an additional $2.8 million in our budget, which would equate to potentially 36 staff members. And we certainly wouldn't spend it all on staff members, but just for argument's sake, what does 2.8 million mean for the school district? It's equivalent of 36 staff members. If we're spending at the Cal average, it's 4.1 million. So we're 4.1 less than the Cal average. And then at the bordering district, 2.8 again. And then, so those are the numbers we're talking about of what that budget means for us. Keep on going. And the same at the PPE, the per pupil expenditure, that's North Reading, a comparison of North Reading and a comparison of Triton. Two districts who we compete against, who generally have similar demographics as us. So is there a correlation between spending and performance? Your exact question, right? The answer is yes, there is. So we go back to 2008. What you see on the top lines up there, were the percentage of students in Kentucky who were proficient or advanced on the MCAS test going back to 2008. So we were doing really pretty well and fairly consistent. And then you see that decline, you get to 2014 and things really start to drop a little bit. They did tick up a little bit. Dr. Bartholomew and I, when we came, we put some things in place, we added a few components, and we did tick up a little bit. But that correlates, you can see for the most part, that gap, the red line, was the gap between the Cal average and us. And it was fairly low, 5%, 7%, 5%, 6%. And then just around 2014, we started a steady climb up to the point where we're at now. And as that happened, that's when performance dropped. So there is a correlation to it, because we were not keeping up with the way we were spending on schooling and education as the other communities around us were. And I'll say this, and Dr. Bartholomew will say it too, we can make do with a lot. If we make cuts in certain areas and we reduce certain things, our staff are really pretty good about trying to make do with various things. And you can cover that up for a year, you can cover it up for 2 years. Once you get to 3 and 4, it catches up with you. And those gaps begin to show. And that's really what happened in sort of year after year after year, and that gap had widened a little bit. You don't have to show these are some visuals for the most part, but it does compare Pentucket in their performance over the last 3 or 4 years to the other school districts. Those are videos a little bit. You can see how it slides over the last 3 or 4 years. So where are these increases coming from in 2023? This is the number that probably maybe caused the alarm that you were referring to. So these cost increases, if the budget is approved as presented, for instance, those are the cost increases. Now, every year, Greg can talk a little bit about this, that those cost increases haven't been that high, but those numbers come to the towns and work through them and generally get to a number that works without having anyone having to ask for an override. But the gap just seems to widen and widen because every year the number we end up settling on is a lot less than where we start, and it builds and builds and builds over the years.
Yeah, it basically came to the point where we would sit down, and Angus has been in these meetings. Under the law, I need 2 towns to agree to the budget, 2 out of 3 passes. Try to use these models, most towns. For the last decade, we've used the idea that all 3 have to be able to afford it. So basically, every year, depending on how some town was getting a really good bargain. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One is because we knew times were tough, and second, we knew what was coming up the street was $140-something million building. So we kind of got through all that, and I mean, if we had done 2 out of 3 the whole time, we would have more money in our budget right now. There's just no other way to put it, probably about $1 million. But that's how much we wanted the 3 out of 3 to go. That's why there's been no overrides in the towns in the last decade.
So what's contributing to these increases? We can continue on here. So some of the big ones, and then the one that's not even up, these are some of the positions that we're really looking to add. The district has gone a long time without sort of building on the positions that are needed. As enrollment reduced, we cut positions that we just simply didn't refill. And that's really how we've made do in doing that. So some of the classroom positions, special education in particular, fulfilling state requirements for facility cleanliness, so look for 2 custodians to add. We're actually well below where we should be with that. Some technology support for personnel, a shift to a full-time athletic director. That's a model. We have an athletic director who's also an assistant principal, and that's not a model that is used around the Cal. There's just too much. You don't get much out of either one in that case. And he does a wonderful job. It's not on him at all. So changing our positions of coordinators for more oversight, and we have new curriculum in the classroom. So we've been fortunate to use some of the federal funds that we've had to update our curriculum. We are replacing textbooks that were purchased in the 1980s. Because for years, the budget was about $40,000 to $60,000 for curriculum. Well, we need to be around $200,000 to $300,000 annually to keep up. So, and when you buy curriculum now, you don't buy just a textbook, you actually buy a 6-year e-license. So 6 years later, you're gonna be doing it again. So you have to build in that cycle of how that funding works now. Additionally, we've used some of that federal funding to create curriculum support people. So we have coaches, curriculum and instructional support coaches helping the teachers to implement this curriculum. Without those people, those teachers are on their own. And when you go back in time and you saw that gap widen back in 2012, 2013, and 14, those positions went away in Pawtucket, and it was the teachers and a principal, and that was all that was left. And again, you can cover that in a year or two, but after 2 to 3 years, that compounds itself, and you just can't keep pace with it. Those show. So, a few of the other things, this was a big one. Transportation is going to be a big cost. A loss in regional transportation funds. That's been a struggle, but the new transportation contracts, those alone would have put us well over where we needed to be to come to you for a larger increase in what we typically.
Isn't this an issue with state funding? Because the reason schools became regionalized was because the state told them that they pay for the transportation costs.
So we could spend all evening discussing.
Really hard.
We could spend all evening discussing state funding issues, because there are state funding issues at various points here. Regional transportation is one of the major ones. We actually took a hit on regional transportation because the buses were not full.
Well, why are we complying with state rules when they don't comply with our rules? I mean, the things they say they do. I don't, why do we have to pay to do the things that they say we have to if they won't fulfill their promises to us?
I wish I had a good answer for you.
You are, I'll just go off the rails a little bit here. You're 100% right. We regionalize for promises that they have not done. They come to you with all sorts of fun things. I noticed something in the paper the other day about, you have to do this spot zoning for all this stuff, but you're gonna lose grants that most likely you wouldn't get anyways that you don't want. It's part of their cost housing shift to make more people move up to here, have our needs go up, and they won't help fund it. I mean, a bigger portion of this, obviously the transportation contract is not the ideal year to go out to bid. And it's gonna cost me a lot more money because that guy hit the Rocks Village Bridge and they're not gonna keep trucking around that thing for a year without asking for extra money, because they are. But that loss of transportation funds, I could not believe that one. They actually gigged us for going to school. Because the buses weren't 100% full because we were going every other day during COVID. They said your buses weren't 75% full, so we're pulling some money back from you. I go, you've got to be kidding me. But
Didn't the definition of full change during that time? That's what I would have said.
I was like,
There were rules of how many people could sit on a bus.
Well, what about the local representative? I mean, it's clearly, are they participating in this process at all?
We
Because
certainly have had communication with them, and we talk with them on a regular basis. I think, some of the issues with local representation is that they're small in the sense of their voice at the state, and larger communities are gonna have more weight, more voices. And they do a wonderful job. Diana, Bruce, Lenny, they do a wonderful job in communication. Their voices are drowned out at times.
they walk into a meeting and give you example, say Representative Muir, for example. He's fighting like heck for regional transportation aid and all these other fun things that we need. And he walks into a room representing 3 towns, and Boston walks in with 20 reps just by themselves. He can scream from the highest ladder, they're just gonna go, no. And he's outvoted, no matter how much of advocacy and how much he tries, and they do try, our reps try their hardest. There's just not much you can do.
There's a few other spots that we can hit for where these expenses are, but that transportation one's a big one. We have unknowns. Maybe Greg, you can speak to a few of these.
Now, these are some that you know now. The insurance cost, the GIC. You will notice part of the reduction we had from the original things we were talking about was health insurance, because I had guessed at 6%, because at some point you have to take a guess. The numbers did come out in the interim between this, and I was able to drop that by 150,000, so that came out when we before your assessment work. The enrollments in our kindergarten classes, last year we had a very, very high enrollment. We had to hire an extra kindergarten teacher for both Sweetser and Bagnell. Obviously, that translates into another first grade teacher this year as they move up. So we were waiting to see what the kindergarten enrollment is, to see if we needed another kindergarten, keep 4 kindergarten teachers there.
Was it a bubble or a trend?
It looked like it was a bubble, thank goodness, well, it's a bubble. So as part of the reduced assessment, we did not include those 2 new first grade teachers. Those kindergarten teachers will now just move up to the first grade to go along with them.
Won't you not know the full kindergarten numbers until later in the year?
I'll let you speak up.
Yeah, you never really know.
Isn't it usually like May, June that you really know?
No, typically by this point, by the middle of March, you have a pretty good sense of where you're at, and you can anticipate a few more rolling in.
We're usually at about 90% of the time right now. And based upon that same 90%-ish, we feel comfortable that we're okay and all that.
Okay.
Process.
Then we have some contracts that we're still working on that are beginning to negotiate, so.
But the teachers one is done.
I was gonna say, that one's been done, right?
That is
And
done.
and that's in the budget, correct?
It's a predictable.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not an unknown.
Actually, the original budget that was there, what you're seeing was my guess. We negotiated after that, and when I put in, say, the elementary school budget for Bagnell Page, and I moved it across, I was basically within 3,000 or 4,000 per school, so it was a really good guess. So it's, yeah, what's in the budget book now does include the teachers' salary increases.
So, other things to consider, and this was, this is not, you're in a different position, listening to Angus speak to tonight than some of the other communities, obviously. Where, we have some catching up to do financially. As you can see, that gap has grown and grown and grown for where the other schools are. And as Greg said, we don't want to spend for the sake of spending. We don't want to just spend to keep up with the Joneses or the Hamilton Lambs or however we want to say it. But clearly not keeping some pace has impacted our ability to support the students the way they need to be. And that's why at this point we decided we need to move forward. We need to build on what we need, and we need to balance that. So that's why we came forward with that. We know this is not easy on the backs of some taxpayers, certainly. But is there a bad time versus a good time? When is there ever really a good time to do that? And like I said, we don't have to win the PPE or net school spending race. That's not what this is about. This is about making sure what do we need in order for the students to be successful, in order for us to meet the needs of all of the students and build out the programming that's needed, and to support the teachers in doing so. Because it's not just about a teacher and a student. There's an infrastructure around it too that we need to have. So.
Can I add a comment on this slide?
Let him finish, and then we'll do that.
I think that might be it, actually. If we click one more, I think that's it. Yeah, there we go. All right. There we go.
Go ahead.
I agree with most of them. The number 7 one sort of bothers me a little.
I feel the same way.
And quite honestly, it doesn't matter to me if your house rich and cash poor. But it's also, and I don't know who this perspective was directed to, whether it was the school committee or the selectmen or the FinComs. But it is all 3 of those committees' responsibility to respond to the taxpayers as to what your perspective is on this. Because if we just wave our hands and say it's all good, and the selectmen say it's all good in the school committee, the people at town meeting are going to go along with that and not vote what they really can afford because they think there's wisdom when it's just absence of speaking what you think. So that one is I find quite bothersome, the perspective of that, I guess.
Well, I don't know. I feel like if you don't have compassion and understanding for other people, you really shouldn't expect any from anybody else. And I mean, we can imagine that we live in a world where everybody in this community can just afford these increases. And it won't affect the way they live their lives, but there are retirees and older families that have been here for a long time. And, with the full effect of the school project coming onto the tax and then, something else. And I mean, we're kind of in this box where we can only raise a certain amount of revenue, but your needs exceed that. So, what I mean? You obviously have a mission and a cause. It's like, we're trapped in a box.
So I think this was written for school committee, if it helps you understand who was sort of is it your job to answer or theirs? I think it was referencing school committee. So.
Right.
And I was gonna say, into his point, it's always going to be this way from now on.
Yeah.
As we were losing staff, we could make up the cause of the gap, so to speak, in the funding. But the simple fact of the matter is the state's walked away from us.
Well, I mean,
If
they
they
say
say
keep up with the
Jackson-
benefits. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't, if nothing else changed and you were like, nothing changed with the benefits, you'd be behind. Wouldn't you? I mean, given the amount of people you carry.
We're behind from day one because the state, like they'll say chapter 70 goes up 4% in the state, and you go, wow, that's great. So we didn't get any of that. We got $69,000. We got 4%. So if our budget goes up 2.5%, immediately the assessment to the towns before they do the two-step juggling is up 5% or more, 5.5%.
We're what is referenced as a held harmless district with chapter 70 funding. So as Greg was just saying, they might increase chapter 70 funding. We only see a $30 per student increase.
Well, we're a donor.
That's $69,000.
We're a donor.
So when our budget goes up $1.4 million, the only part the state's contributing to that is $69,000 of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we get,
Yep.
less than $1 per contribution, and the Lawrences and Lowells of the world get like $1.35 or whatever, that exceeds their contribution.
That's right. You're 100% right. For example, if we had got that 4% had been applied across the board, we wouldn't have got 69,000. We would have got 380,000
Yeah.
in the state. That helps a lot. But again, we're not being applied equal. You're right. We're donors.
A little.
Go ahead.
Some know, some don't. I was previously on the school committee. The only budget I ever did not vote for was one that I felt was too low. They didn't add enough for teachers. This was a number of years ago. So yeah, the schools are underfunded. We have the problem that, at least in particular in West Newbury, we don't have any industrial commercial base. It's all on the backs significantly of residential taxpayers. So there's no benefit there. So it becomes very difficult to fund it the way it should be funded. But West Newbury is going to be coming up against, more so than the other towns, a number of unique situations. And one of them is, although this is not an override for West Newbury, it's not, because we have this stabilization fund that was created. And the town is taking $393,000, I believe, out of that
Proposing 397.
to offset. If we didn't have that luxury,
That's not factored in.
it won't.
It's not into our tax calculation, no.
Okay, but at a certain point, that's
It
gonna
will.
run out
That's correct, yeah.
in 3 or 4 years, and we're not gonna have the benefit. That number comes into play. We're going to have the new high school project fully on the tax base.
That's right.
And then when these overrides, whatever, if it was an override in town, that becomes part of your base budget for the next year. So 3 or 4 years down the road, I'm in favor of this. I'm gonna vote for the budget. But in 3 or 4 years down the road, West Newbury residents are gonna have their heads spinning because of the significant costs that are gonna rise to the surface that they really haven't seen the full burden of. I don't have an answer how you get around it. It's going to be the reality. And they should be aware of that when they vote on this, is all I'm saying.
We've got the ed problem, paid school coming down around our ears, since we gotta do something with that before too long. That's gonna fall on this town.
I'll leave the facilities department. If you would like to talk to the
Do
school.
we want a motion and a second, and then we can have.
Sure. Make a motion to approve the Pentucket budget.
Second.
What's any additional discussion? You've kind of been chipping away at it anyway, but Jim, do you have anything you'd like to share?
No, very clear.
Nathan?
I have some questions. So you pointed out the spending gap expanding, and I appreciate the comment that you made, Greg. And it's referenced in the letter that Dr. B had to the school committee back in January about it doesn't matter if we're spending the most as long as we're having the optimal teaching environment and experience. With the budget that's before us tonight, and maybe this is more towards you, Mr. Conway, are we providing the optimal learning environment and opportunities? And if not, how and where not?
So I think we're certainly getting a lot closer. You know, when we started with this dialogue around what really do we need for to move forward, there were some other components. I'll add, we're, you know, in this budget as a district, we're made some changes from the district side to use some of our stabilization as well to get to this budget. And we are paying for some critical positions, 3 instructional coaches and a social worker out of our federal funds. Those run out in 2 more years. So they're certainly, and I'll say this, I think we bottomed out from an enrollment standpoint as well. As enrollment starts to go back up, you open a new building, you have more people with kids who want to put their kids in that building, it comes, it happens, build it, they will come.
Sure.
We will probably need some more at some point coming down the road. I think this puts us in a much better position moving forward to support what we want to be able to do.
It's frustrating to hear things like textbooks from the 80s, 30 plus years ago getting replaced, and I certainly understand the perspective of
that's history text too.
Yeah, a lot. Curriculum, you know, the 6-year digital budgets and that sort of thing. I think that's something that definitely makes sense that you'll have to plan for. It's not like you can just have a textbook and say, we're going to use that textbook for the next 30 years. You know, whatever subjects books are pretty good now, that subject isn't changing much here and there, but I understand all that. But what I also want to ask about is, you see the spending gap expanding that you were pointing out. What are the other school communities spending it on? Because you referenced, you know, 37 teachers, whatever it was, but where are they actually spending the money?
Sure.
And the graph showed also the test scores went down. Have the surrounding communities test scores gone down in that 4-year window as well, or is it just ours?
So I can talk in general terms around it. I don't know that I can give you data exactly from other districts, but I do know some of those CAL districts that we talked about did actually pass overrides at various points from about 2011 to 2018. So they made a jump and a change in the way they were funding schools. Well, we did not necessarily do that. And there were reasons why Kentucky did not do that. What you will find is obviously after the pandemic last year. So actually, Angus, can you go forward one more slide? So no, that first one that comes up in those blue, there you go. So do you mind if I stand up?
Sure.
You want me to hit play?
No, don't. So this is a chart that shows the growth and this is on math, for instance, okay? So the level of growth and the level of achievement, and it's a quadrant. So where do you want to be in a quadrant? You want to be in the top right-hand corner, okay? Where's Pentucket? In the bottom left-hand corner. That's not the place you want to be. And these are all those CAL districts. So when you say, were they getting the results? Yes, they were getting the results and we were not. So when you see that chart.
Well, even just reading it linearly, vertically, it says that we're at the bottom in terms of achievement.
Achievement and growth.
Right.
We're all the way over here too.
Well, growth tritons to the left, so it's slower in growth.
But by and large, all of those other districts are basically doing better.
But essentially the way to read that, to your point, your question is that we are the lowest performing district on whatever this is measuring in terms of whatever achievement is. I don't know if this is an MCAS score or some other thing.
This is MCAS from 2017.
Okay.
Yep. We started to make some gains, and you actually saw that in another chart. You saw us go up a little bit, right? English is something very similar. I think if you go one more.
If that graphic does play,
so here's English.
It later.
Right? Here's your ELA English, and there we are.
Right.
2017.
Again,
Same thing.
I think the most important, and growth matters, of course.
Yep.
But comparing it to where we were, we can also clearly see that we're the lowest performing district based on that standard there, and that's not a good thing, obviously.
So where were they spending money? I think it varies, and it's probably even shifted now just in the last year or two. You certainly have seen a lot of districts around us spend money on supports for social emotional needs of students. Who've seen this at counseling, social workers, coordinators of a lot of this. So as you put these things into place, you need people to coordinate.
Right, I think that makes sense. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think that makes sense in light of what we've all been through for the last 2 years, but this problem has occurred before that.
So when you go back even further, they had instruction, these districts, many of them had instructional coaches. If you recall, I'm the assistant superintendent. Pentucket went several years with no assistant superintendent.
Right.
No coordinators who were full-time support personnel, no assistant principals at the elementary schools. None of those existed. And that was all happening as the performances were dictated. And that's what happened. So those districts did not have that. That didn't happen to them. They had those roles in place, and they're there to support the teachers, to support the students, and to make sure that there is aligned curriculum that is supported in all those. In addition to not having updated materials and resources. Our teachers were either using a very outdated text, or it was curriculum by choice, and they chose whatever they found, and it was not necessarily high quality.
So even if that gap does not close based on this budget,
We're getting closer to.
Do you expect is your anticipation that the achievement gap will lessen?
Yeah, and you
based on
actually,
the current budget.
we had made a couple changes, and you saw that the achievement gap actually began to change a little bit, and then the pandemic hit. So sort of all data analysis goes out the window following that. But
is there anything that you can point to other than the social emotional stuff that you related, or the additional coaching and tutoring positions that you mentioned? Other things that they might be spending on? Anything else that you can point at?
Those are probably the big ones. I mean, there are districts who have a lot of support personnel.
How are we doing in terms of technology, in terms of what our students have? At what level are we one-to-one?
So we are pretty much one-to-one from about the middle school on up. We've actually, that was something that both Dr. Bartholomew and our tech team working with Mr. LeBrecq were able to invest in a cycle where we'll be able to purchase Chromebooks.
Are we in a comfortable position with that contract?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Do you have these same charts over time? How would we look in?
So this is actually a little video.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a chance to see that.
Did you see it?
No.
Okay.
In our material, it was just.
You can watch this. So.
now.
And then you can, it'll
No,
switch to 2018. And you can see there's a little bit of movement there.
Right.
You'll see it go again to 2019. So we're moving, right?
Right.
And then the pandemic, there's nothing in 2020, and then 2021 happens, and everyone begins to collapse, right? So you can do those same thing, the same one, and Angus, maybe we can share this with everyone.
Yeah, this was all just pulled off their website, but it wouldn't be easy to find, so I'll send them.
Well, even still, if you took an overlay of these four graphs together, it'd be interesting that we'd be in the same position. We'd have less of an overall shift than the others in a way.
Yeah, but I will say.
Or if you just average the four graphs together, it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions, concerns?
Um,
Do you have anything left, or?
Let me just give me 1 minute, please. So can we just go to page 64 for a second on the. On our, no, it was 64 in our packet.
Yep, that's what this is.
Okay, okay. What of this remains? Because I know a lot of this has been cut at this point, or is it, which, I don't know which way it's better to ask, what remains versus what's cut from this. Because I know that there were budget changes.
I can tell you really quickly. The 6 special ed positions remain, the 2 grade 1s do not. The director of human resources does, 2 custodians do. Pay increase for the guys working at the elementary school stays. The 2 tech aides, they both, that's reduced to 1. The data technician stays, the tech repair stays. The 4 sped coordinators have been reduced to 3 sped coordinators. And the convert budget to 80 stays.
And it's your position at this point in time that the 2, you will not need the 2 kindergarten based on, you believe, based on the data that you have at this point, it is definitely a bubble what you saw.
Correct, and if they do materialize, that we do need them, we would go get them.
Because I have a hard time with you said the last position stays, is that right?
Well, that becomes.
It becomes a 1AD and 1 AP.
Correct.
I just looking at it, I know it's apples and oranges, but I would have a hard time saying what we need if we needed to cut 2 grade 1 teachers to be able to afford to expand this position to a full AD and a full AP. That would be
frustrating. The numbers don't support us. We are very fortunate to have actually some really good class size numbers.
Okay.
Where I've worked in a couple other districts who would all be very envious of the class size numbers. Now, that alone doesn't make kids learn, right? But it's a pretty good, we're in a pretty good place with that. And we keep an eye on it. Some of the challenges in the elementary class size numbers is being a regional school district as opposed to having 3 schools within a town. As you can begin to shift some of that to make it work, we really can't do that.
Right.
So you have to handle that within the building, but we're pretty comfortable moving ahead with that. This is.
All right. I have nothing further.
You guys have anything else? So we've had a motion, a second, we've had discussion. All those in favor of supporting the budget as presented, unanimously passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, excellent.
Do we need to go over the schedule for the next meeting, or we?
No, did you want to talk about the proposed drawdown of school stabilization, or did you want to wait till next week on that?
Why don't we wait till next week?
Okay. And I think that's good because the select board has talked about potentially, we have that amount in there, the 397, 325. It's possible before it might change that one. Tapering that over a period of time, so.
Okay. No communications, anybody have any communications we need to hear? What's the will of the committee?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Is there ever?
No. I have to ask. All those in favor of adjournment? Unanimously passes.